Hi, everybody. Let's take a look at the Revolutionary War, which pitted the 13 colonies against England and would give birth to the United States of America. First, let's take a look at some of the causes, and the first one being the French and Indian War, also known as the 7 Years' War. Here, England united the 13 colonies to drive France out of North America. However, England, in order to pay off some of this war debt, began to levy taxes against the colonies. Colonists were angered by these taxes because, one, they were expensive, and two, they had no representation in the British Parliament. Thus, we get that famous expression, no taxation without representation. And after a series of protests and skirmishes, it eventually leads to all-out war. And for the sake of time, I'll only outline some of the key military engagements here. And the first one being in the spring of 1775, we get the Battle of Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts. It's also known as the Shot Heard Around the World. And this is considered the first military engagement of the war. And here's where Paul Revere and others warn the towns of Massachusetts that the British are coming. And the Minutemen engage in guerrilla warfare. The next key engagement is the Battle of Bunker Hill in Boston, and this is soon after Lexington and Concord. And here's where the colonists stand their ground but are eventually overrun by the British. The key importance of this being that this is a big confidence booster for the Minutemen, for the colonial militias. Next, we get Valley Forge. And this isn't actually a battle, but this is where the Continental Army camped out in Pennsylvania. And it's key because during this time, in the winter of 1777, morale was very low for George Washington's army because of a series of defeats. And then there's a lot of disease, and then bitter cold racked the troops. And here, George Washington exhibited his famous strong leadership qualities and motivated his troops to stay in the fight. And probably the biggest turning point of the war was the Battle of Saratoga in the fall of 1777. And here's where the Continental Army defeated the British forces in New York. And France, who had been watching this Revolutionary War unfold from afar, was still upset about their defeat in the 7 Years' War to the British. And they determined after this victory at Saratoga for the colonists that the colonies were for real. And thus, they decided to join the war as their allies. And now America had a major world power and all the benefits that came with that. The French Navy, French naval power, French troops, and even some of their leadership. A lot of people say, without the French support, there's a very good likelihood that the United States would not have won the Revolutionary War. And then the battle that kind of ends it all is the Battle of Yorktown. It's the fall of 1781, and here's where George Washington and his French allies surround the British in this port town in Virginia. And the French Navy created a naval blockade so the British couldn't come in and resupply. And then George Washington and his army surrounded by land, and the largest British force in North America is forced to surrender, effectively ending military engagements. And it all ends at the Treaty of Paris in 1783, and England has to recognize the 13 colonies as the United States of America. Now, let's wrap up with some of the effects of the Revolutionary War. First of all, this is bad news for Native Americans because now settlers will begin widespread settlements west of the Appalachians, which was technically illegal under British rule because of the Proclamation of 1763. This is also bad news for slaves in America. England was beginning to doubt the slave trade. The United States, however, was very much in favor of it. But at the time, England controlled an empire that stretched around the world. The fact that a group of ragtag colonists could rise up and pull off victory would set the stage for revolutions across Europe and the rest of Americas. The United States now controls all 13 colonies, which was the land from the Atlantic coast to the Mississippi River. They were free to trade with any country as opposed to only trading with British-controlled areas. Although this initially becomes difficult due to the pirate attacks the United States has to endure because they had always had the protection of the British Navy, now they could trade with whoever they wanted, whenever they wanted. And at the end of the day, the United States of America was the first country to overthrow their colonial master and establish a republic, which the world had not seen since ancient Rome 2,000 years earlier.